Hi there, thanks for joining me today. My name's Jo. I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator in the UK. I'm going to share with you this card today. Now, I've made this for two reasons. One, because I wanted to share with my customers some of the new in colours, another way to use them, but also I wanted to show them it's quite an old technique called bleaching. Now, we literally used to use a little pot of bleach to bleach out the colours of our cardstock to create a lighter background on which we could colour. Now, I never really liked using bleach because it's quite a strong sort of chemical. So in those days I used to use Milton, which is sort of a cleaning fluid for wiping down surfaces where babies might be. It kills all the germs and everything else. It was a slightly sort of lighter than a bleach, but it was still chemical based, which I'm not very keen on. So I wanted to show them a way you could use the same technique, but just by using water, really. So I'm going to show you how we've made this. So I've started off with two new in colours. So I'll pop that to one side and I will obviously bring that in at some point. So we have a card here. I'm going to make this one a landscape one actually, but the sizes of the cards. So this one was 21 centimetres by 14.85 and scored at 10.5. And I'm going to do the landscape version this time. So this is our full length A4, which is 29.75. Scored at 14.85 and it's 10.5 high. So I'm just going to do a landscape one this time. And this is Starry Sky and this is Tahitian Tide. Now Tahitian Tide is a really beautiful colour. I absolutely love it on its own, but I love the way it works with the Starry Sky as well, and it's really, really good for this technique. So this piece measures 13.85 by 9.5, and that is the same as the other one as well. It's just obviously we've used it around that way rather than this way. So that's what we need. So I'm going to bring in, this is just a sponging mat that I've had in my supplies for years, but it's just really good for inking because it's sort of it wipes up really easy, it washes up really easily, and also it's sort of I don't need to use any other things on that either other than water. So we're going to start off with Orchid Oasis. So I'm using 3 of the in colours here, and in fact the other 2 are going to come into play a little bit later. So it's using all of our 5 new in colours: Tahitian Tide, Orchid Oasis. So I'm going to start off with this one first, and I've just got one of our blending brushes here, and I'm just going to pick up some ink, and I want to start building in some colour onto the Tahitian Tide. Now, it's better to do this slowly rather than go in too harsh too quick. We do want to build up quite a lot of colour, but we also want to leave this centre panel so it keeps its original colour. Now, although it will keep its original colour, it actually takes on a sort of a different tone in some respects because of the dark blues around it. So just build up this colour. We want it dark around the edges. Like I say, we're going to keep this middle section. Now, just a quick tip. Can you see I've got a little mark there? That's come off my finger now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a piece of kitchen roll so that when I'm actually blending, I can hold my card down with a piece of tissue, and what that will do, it will stop that sort of thing happening. I won't pick up the ink on my fingers and it won't spread to places I don't want it. It doesn't matter because it's going to be covered. So it might look a bit patchy at this moment. That's fine. It will blend. We just need to get down some colour. So I've just been round once. I'm just going to go round again. Add in some more. Just lighter in that centre section, remember. Also, the patchiness can appear because of the texture of the card. Now, some of these cards, different colours, have different textures on the card. So sometimes you get more of a patchiness than you do on others. But don't worry about it because once you've got all your bits and pieces on it, you don't actually notice anyway. But it's just nice to get as smooth as we can over the top. And the beauty of this blending mat, can you see I'm just lifting most of the colour, so I'm not wasting any ink really. Okay, so I'm just going to concentrate on this middle section for a moment, just to blend that through a little bit more. And I think that will be enough of the Orchid Oasis. So now I'm going to bring in Starry Sky. So this is the dark blue. This is the colour of our base card. So again, I'm just going to start with this, first of all on the edges, and then I shall bring it in a little bit just to blend with that orchid. So we've got 3 blues essentially in our collection this year, and I know initially people were quite surprised by that, but I think actually because they work so well together, I think they're actually great. So it's nice to embrace them all really. So you can see it's starting to smooth off a little bit, just because this darker blue is coming in now. Again, I'm just going to pick up any excess ink off there as well. You can see how it's smoothing out now because we've got those colours blending together. Just work on it. It takes a little bit of time. And I do like to try and go in as dark as I can on the edges and on the corners. Notice I used the same brush for the 2 blues because I was starting with the lighter blue. It didn't matter. I could then go on to use the dark blue, and then once I'm finished I'll wash the ink out of it so that we can right, okay, so I think that is sufficient. I'm quite happy with the base that I've got on that, so I'm going to move my sheet out of the way. Okay, so this is our base, all right? So we just want to make sure that our ink is dry. Now this is quite important because we're going to be heat embossing on this in a moment. So I'm just going to wipe it over just a little bit with my tissue, and it's picking up, you probably can't see it on camera, but it is picking up just a very, very light blue on there. Okay, so I've got to remember I'm doing this one in landscape so I don't get carried away. So I have got a very old dust buddy. It's hardly got anything in it, and I'm not worried if I get any ink on this. I've got a nice new one that I used generally. So I'm going to use this just to cover over the top, just to make sure that I don't have any embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to be. Now this is a really good idea generally, but I would make sure that your ink is dry generally before you do this. It's just that obviously I'm doing it for camera. Okay, so now that I know that I'm not going to collect anything nasty on there, I'm going to use the stamp set called Fresh Cut Flowers, and it's this large stamp here. I mean, it's such a beautiful stamp. It really is quite large. You can see it is actually at full size there, so it's a really, really beautiful size stamp. And the actual lines are so fine that it really loans itself to beautiful colouring techniques. A really gorgeous one. So I've got Versamark ink pad, which is our watermark ink, and also the one that we will use for heat embossing. And I'm first of all going to stamp my focal one. So this is going to be my main piece that I'm going to see, and then I'm going to add some elements on the other side shortly. So I'm just going to grab my gold embossing powder. So this is just our normal gold. I've just got it in a pot, that's all. Just make sure I've picked up on all the pieces. Okay, so I think that's okay. So I'm just going to heat set that now. Okay, so I know that that's all set, so that's absolutely fine. And I'm just going to add a couple of little focal ones elsewhere, but these ones aren't going to be coloured. These are going to be just plain, and I want parts of the flower. So I can do these both at the same time. And I'm just going to do it at that angle. So these are just to add a little interest in the background, really. They're not going to be coloured or anything like that. So again, just my gold embossing powder. You could, of course, use any colour you wanted in embossing powder. This is our border, but I like the way the gold pops against the dark colour. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so that is now all heat set. So I know that we have got a nice border going round, and we're not going to have anything where we don't want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to grab my tissue back, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a pot of water. So traditionally this is where we would have grabbed our pot of bleach, and we would have worked in certain areas to try and actually bleach the colour of the cardstock. But we can do this quite simply by using just water and a paper towel. So it's just plain water, and I've got quite a fine paintbrush. You can use your water painters if you want to. You just need to be a little bit careful that they don't produce too much water. So I would recommend that you empty the canal of the actual painter itself and just have a pot of water like I'm using here. So what I want to do is I want to go into all of my areas. So I'm going to work on one at a time, and as I put water in it, I'm going to blot it. So you can see I'm not putting any pressure on this because I don't want to break down the fibres in the paper, but I'm just adding water. Now can you see I've gone over slightly there? Don't worry too much if that happens, because we're going to be putting some coloured interest into it later, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to let that dry so it doesn't take that any further. So just try and keep in the lines the best you can. And you might need to do this several times until we lift enough colour to make it light again underneath. Now it's not going to get it back to the colour of the Tahitian tide. That's never going to go that far back, but we just want to remove as much as we can. And can you see how it's lighter? When it dries, it actually dries lighter. So if we leave that one for a moment, you'll see what I mean. I've got a little bit there, and this bit here. I'm not using masses of water, I'm just using enough just to make it damp. As I say, I don't want to work it too much because I don't want the fibres to break down. You see how that's lightening just where it's drying. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another area here. Now, provided your pieces are within the lines, you can do more than one little piece at a time. So don't worry about having to move or concentrate on one piece at a time. Also, a little tickle in my throat. And again, when you do the flower, just go over, just take care to be inside the outside lines, but the other lines you can just go up to and over the top. You're not going to hurt anything. So all that hard work putting the blue ink on, and now we're taking it off. Now what will happen as well, because of the actual sponging underneath, it will remove some pieces more than others. So we'll naturally get our natural sort of shading and tones, which is lovely. So don't, if one, like this is darker here, don't spend too much time trying to make one section lighter, because it's not going to matter. It's going to give us that natural shading. So I tend to work on the whole thing at once. I'm going to leave that for a moment and I'll come back to it. And you can see how it's lifting that colour. So this just means that we haven't had to use any hard chemicals to get that same effect that we always looked for with the bleach. Now, the only thing that did used to happen with the bleach, it was a fun technique. I just wasn't very comfortable using it, but sometimes the core colour of your cardstock is not what you imagine. So, for example, one I seem to remember, and I'm sure this was correct, was crumb cake. Now, when you put bleach onto crumb cake, it turned like a green colour. So it wasn't always what you expected to be, obviously the core colours that were made up in the cardstock. So you never quite knew what you was going to get, but it was always good fun to sort of work it out. But obviously you're not going to get that with just water, but this one's a lot nicer. It's a lot softer. So now obviously I'm not going to lift a great deal here because this is mainly that center point, but I'm still going to work over it because it will still give us that sort of tones. Okay, so now what I want to do is to start adding some colour. So I'm going to start off with Parakeet Party. Now this is going to be for our greens. Now this is a really sort of eye-popping green. It's sort of a parakeet green really. It's very limey, but because we're putting it onto the blue, it's actually really creating a nice effect. So I'm just going to pick up some of the ink, and I just squidged my ink pad there just to get some ink into the top. So I want a reasonable depth of colour, and I'm going to bring it over on to my card. And as I say, you don't need to do much in the way of shading and stuff like that, because it's naturally going to fall onto those darker areas where not so much colour's removed. So it's very quick painting really, which is lovely. Although I like painting for hours, so, but it is quite a nice quick technique if you sort of like to do a card and move on. Okay, so I'm just going to continue. I'm not using too much water here. I'm just making sure that my brush is nice and damp so that it actually does sort of flow across the card as opposed to sort of drag. But I really don't need too much in the way of water. And can you see how that green is popping off of that blue? And it's not that sort of lime green anymore. It's sort of it's got like a bluey undertone, obviously, which is coming through. Now you could obviously have painted directly over without actually removing some of the colour underneath, but your colours would be really quite dark, where this is a good way to try and make them just pop off the page a little bit more. Okay, so I think that's all my leaves done. So if you want to go back and touch up anywhere you can, but it's really sort of not necessary mainly, and just let it dry and let it sort of find its own way really. Okay, so that was our parakeet party. So this time I'm going to use Sweet Sorbet. Now this is the beautiful pinky red, new pinky red. And this is going to look quite dark on here because we're going over the blue. But again, you don't need to be too careful. You just make sure you stay within the lines, but just work it over the top of the embossing. We can buff that off in a moment, just to remove anything that might stay. And where the darker areas are on your flower, they will naturally darken again once the red is over the top. You can always feel when you need a little bit more water because your paintbrush will start to drag slightly and won't flow. So just, if that happens, just wet it a little bit more. And again, obviously this is going to be slightly brighter because it's lighter underneath. But although our colours are water-based, they do give such a beautiful covering, especially the darker colours. They're not, you know, they're not too opaque, so it's nice just to... Now, because this one hasn't got a huge amount underneath it, what I am going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of darker in certain places just to try and add that sort of shadow, natural shadows that would be in a flower. I'm not going to go over the top with it, and I'm not going to, you know, try and blend the colours too much, and just want to try and just darken it just a tad in these, especially in the centre. Just let it find its own way. Okay, and again, if you want to add another layer, you can, if it's not quite the colour you want, or if you just want it to shine a little bit more. And now I'm going to let that dry because that will take on a different effect once it's dry in any event. Okay, so it won't take long to dry because we've not used a great deal of water on this at all. So what I want to do now is to take my Wink of Stella, because I love Wink of Stella, and I'm just going to add this onto the flower and the leaves. It just adds that little sparkle. Again, not sure that you can probably see that on the camera, but at least you'll get an idea of what I'm doing. Just doing all my green first because the red does tend to pick up on the tip of the Wink of Stella, whereas the green doesn't really. So, and again, I'm not really taking too much care. I'm literally just going over the top and just adding that shimmer to it. Okay, so that is our main focal flower actually done. So now what I want to do is to create the background. So if you look on this one, you can see I've got this sort of speckled background. So I'm going to move that one out of the way because what we need to do is just to take some water. So this is just our normal water that we were using before. And I'm just going to tap some drops. I'm trying to stay away from my flower if I can. I'm not worried if some does go on it, but just try and keep away from the main flower heads. The leaves are fine, or sort of any other area really. And you can do as much of this or as little as you wish. And you can see already that's starting to create this background. So again, I'm just going to take my tissue and I just want to blot up any water that I've got on there. Now that will start to sort of spread and dry, and the colour underneath will change. And it's at this point you can see whether you've sort of missed any spots, you want to put a few more patches in, or where I've got some big ones there, I want some smaller ones. Okay, so that now has created our background, and again it's not very wet, it's quite dry, so we're not to worry too much about sort of waiting for it to dry or anything. It's not got a lot of moisture on it. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to add my greeting part to the bottom. I can find the end of my tape. Now, because I'm being mean and I love this ribbon so much, I'm not going to use as much as I normally would, in the sense that I'm going to glue it to the back of my card. So normally I would, if I was using something like linen thread, then I'd probably just use wrap around, but not when I'm using lovely ribbon. Okay, so this is the new ribbon. This is the Starry Sky, and it's sort of like a weave, a metallic weave. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to pop it across the bottom section. Just make sure I've got enough to go round to the back. And I am actually going to use another bit of tape. I'm not going to remove the back on it, but I'm just going to use another bit of tape over the top, because I've noticed this one has started to move very slightly. It's because it's one of those ribbons that sort of has a memory, so it kind of wants to go back to where it originally was. So I'm just using an extra one for safety. I'm going to bring in my card base. Now this one I have mounted using dimensionals. Oh, just need to clear my throat again. Talking too much. So I'm not using too many, but I do just want to make sure that the centre is supported, because that's really important, especially if it's going to go through the post. Oh, excuse me, trying to clear my throat. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this one on top. It's very difficult, the angle that I'm sitting at, to see whether it's straight or not. So excuse me while I just lift it up a moment. I can see that's not quite. I always very lightly place it to start with, because that does then give you the opportunity to remove it if it's not quite where you want it to be. Okay, that's much better. So the next thing I want to do is to create my little greeting. Now I have done this ahead of time just to save us a little bit of time, but I will talk you through what I've used. So I have used the Inspired Thoughts stamp set and I have used this one here, Thinking of You on Your Special Day. I've then cut it out, it's stamped in Starry Sky. I've then cut it out using this tag here, which is from the TaylorMade tag dies. And then I've just used, again, another little piece of our little ribbon there just to enhance it on there. Now, what I didn't want to do was to wrap the ribbon around and then try and tie it. By doing it independently, one, you're using less materials, but two, it means you've got a little bit more control over where everything goes. So it's just a preferred way to do it. So I'm going to stick a dimensional on the actual top end. And then I'm going to take a couple of glue dots, which I'm just going to stick either side of the hole where the ribbon is. Okay, and I can position this exactly where I want it to go. I'll do nicely. So that just gives that little lift. It makes it look a bit more three-dimensional. And then finally, I'm going to add some of the Iridescent Rhinestones. These are really pretty because they've got that iridescence to them. And it picks up all the colours that are in the sort of card as well. So can you see I've got that little line? Well, I think that was my nail did that, wasn't it? So I'm just going to take one of my rhinestones and that's going to go right over the top. So that's now gone. And then going to just put 2 or 3 elsewhere. Just to remember, we always work in uneven numbers, so 3 or 5 is sort of where we're going really. So I think I'm just going to put another one there. I'm going to have 5 on this one, I think. Another one down here, be extravagant, and then I think I'll just have one over there. There we go. So that is our card. So as you can see, it's a really it's a cool technique. It's quite good fun. It's easy to achieve and you don't need many materials to do it, but it also takes away using those harsh chemicals, which I wasn't so keen on. So I hope you like that. Give it a go with some different colours because there's so many beautiful colours in our collection. It would work really well with sort of like the purple tones, so the sort of fresh freesia, Highland heather, gorgeous grape, those sort of tones, maybe with a bit of blackberry bliss thrown in. Those would work really well together. You do need quite a dark colour to make it pop, but I think they would work really, really well. So I hope you like that and enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.